Welcome back on the Catch Up with Kestner podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to catch up with Kestner. Today we have Mr. Wandera throwing it back to my high school days, my high school dean, my high school mentor, my high school student government teacher, just all the above. And I'm really blessed, really fortunate to have you on today's episode as we go through this new teacher series. So thank you so much, Mr. Wandera.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you invited me. And it's cool to be catching up with Kestner.
Thank you. So when I think back to just my high school days and where I've gone, I really attest a lot of my growth, a lot of my accomplishments with you believing in me ever since I was a freshman in high school. So we're going to get a lot into just the journey that we've shared together and a lot of what you've been up to recently. So for the people that don't know who you are, Mr. Wandera, who are you? What have you been up to? Real quick, we'll start off with that.
So we're connected because I was Dean of Students, Vice Principal at Leadership Public Schools for 15 years, 15 long years, right?
Yeah.
And so we crossed paths during that time. And then, 2 years ago, I made a decision to try something new and try something different to really kind of push myself. So I made a decision to leave, which was very hard to do because, it's hard to leave a job that you love and leave a place that you love and do something that you're familiar with and then turn around and do something that you're not familiar with.
That's true.
Require you to jump off the ledge. So I jumped off the ledge head first and then took an opportunity to go be the Director of African American Achievement in West Contra Costa Unified School District, which was a really unique and amazing opportunity to be able to, affect change in West Contra Costa. And so then after I did that, I recognized that there was a little bit of difference between what I imagined and what I had hoped for versus the things that I wanted to do in my life. So I made a decision to do something different. And so then this past summer, I took a summer opportunity. So I was actually director of the National Summer School Initiative.
Wow.
Actually, summer school happening for 3rd through 8th graders across the country. It's about 20,000 kids, I guess, in total across the country. And I was helping a lot of Oakland students make sure that their skill sets weren't lost during the summer. So,
oh, wow. I love it.
We really did a lot of work with math and science and stuff like that here in Oakland for about 200 students locally to get them prepared for the school year and catch up on some of the stuff they lost during distance learning.
Yeah.
And now the big opportunity is coming next, where I just recently was named executive director of a program called SEO, which stands for Sponsors for Educational Opportunities out in San Francisco. And it's a college access program that's set up to send, low-income first-generation students to college, which sounds very similar to the work that I was doing with LPS.
Yep. There you go.
And so it's really kind of a full circle moment because it's also attached to the work that the Upper Bound program does in terms of how they go about doing it. And the Upper Bound program was a program that I came up in when I was in high school that helped me a lot and put me on the path to college. And so it's really like combining like the two things that I love the most in my life, Upper Bound with LPS. And so now I get to do that as a job. So I'm super excited about that.
Man, just when I think back to how much time you've dedicated and spent into Leadership Public Schools, it's so refreshing and really, really honoring to say that I was a part of that journey. And so to see where you are now and to what you've accomplished over the 15 years, like you said, a lot of good things we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to dial back the clock a little bit, Mr. Wandera. Going back to your pre-LPS days, walk me through that exact moment when you knew you wanted to help create a new school.
So before LPS, I was actually, I think this is important. So I taught middle school and high school when I was in Virginia. I went to college in Virginia, so I taught middle and high school there. and then I moved back home to California, and I started working with the Upward Bound program. And I was there for many, many years. And then I had an opportunity to go be a supervisor at a clinical mentoring program. And so when I was doing that program, it was different because I wasn't working with students. I was working with adults who were working with students.
Okay.
And that was the moment I realized, like, I don't like sitting in an office all day. I think I need to be in a school somewhere. This is not for me. I'd rather be with kids. Right? And so I started looking. So I had an opportunity to be a dean of students at KIPP in San Francisco. And when I did that job, like, I really loved the job. And I was like, oh, I like this job. I like what I'm doing, and I like how I'm doing it, right? But I taught middle school, and I taught high school. And so being a dean of students at the middle school, while I loved the job, I also realized that I really missed high school. Right? And so I started looking to see if there were some opportunities to be able to do that same job, but on a high school level. And so I found this place called Leadership Public Schools. And the irony is that when I found the job, I interviewed with Mr. Greenberg, who was the first person. And then when he and I interviewed, we didn't have a building to interview in because there was no building, there was no school, right? Crazy. So we actually did our interview in Berkeley, right? So imagine you're interviewing for a job and it's in a city you're not going to be in, right? And then when I applied to the job, you should know that LPS Hayward was opening at the same time as LPS Oakland, right? And so when you apply to the job, you actually apply to the organization as a whole. You don't apply to a particular school. Okay. So when I met with Mr. Greenberg, I actually thought that I was interviewing for the job in Oakland because I'm from Oakland. Right? So I was like, I want to work in Oakland. Right. I had no intentions of working in Hayward. Right. And so when he offered me the job, I was like, great. And I was like, so, like, where's the school? And then he was like, well, we're still working on that right now. And then eventually we had a spot in San Leandro. Like, San Leandro? I didn't know it was going to San Leandro. So we opened up in San Leandro at the place that KIPP current is actually interesting. Yeah, is located. So where KIPP is located right now was LPS's initial school. So if KIPP ever has anything to say, we can always say we own them because we started there first. So we were there, and then we moved over to the current location. Right. And when we got there, it was myself, Mr. Greenberg, Mr. Salazar, who was the office manager, and Simon. Right. Wow. Yeah. And that was it. Right. And so we literally started from scratch. We're doing a bunch of interviews with teachers and eventually hiring 5 teachers. And really just kind of going after it after that. Then it was a matter of, like, finding students. Right. So the finding students part was weird because, like, one, bless you, we have no, we don't have no history in the city. Right. Nobody even knows what LPS is. Yeah. Right. So now imagine, like, you're me, 6'3", 200 pounds, standing in front of a middle school with a flyer in your hand, like, hey, kid, please come to my school. Oh, that's my daughter. Say hi, Aaliyah. Hello. Stop. So, like, who is this guy who's trying to get me to come to his school? Right. So it was very weird trying to do recruiting and stuff like that. And then, like, going to boys and girls clubs and doing presentations and all that kind of stuff, like real, like, grassroots begging level to get kids to come. And eventually we convinced about 80, 85 parents to come to this place that they had never heard of, with no track record, with nothing, to just say, like, give it a shot. Right. And so, 15 years later, one of the top high schools in the country, one of the best in the state, and have gotten numerous accolades and awards and all those kind of things. Yeah. And so it's really a testament to, like, what can happen if you have a vision and a dream, you believe in something, you put your energy into it. And so, a lot of great things came out of LPS, including you. So, so yeah, that's kind of the pathway of how I got there.
Mm. I love the idea that you used a lot of your own experiences and a lot of where your identity lied in playing out where you wanted to take your career. I think it's important to acknowledge that, you know, you were once a middle school and high school teacher, and the fact that, you know, you loved working with kids and you didn't really see yourself working in a cubicle or an office space, and you know, you really challenged your idea of what else can I do that's going to satisfy my desire, my passion to serve kids, but also in a way that's, you know, a little bit toward who I am. And so when I think back to how you said you were a middle school and, you know, high school teacher, and you taking that step of applying to the next thing or whatever that was at the time, and for you to pretty much go out on a limb and say, you know, I'm going to dive into this idea of being a dean, for students at a school that, you know, I have no experience with, I have no connection with per se, and then, but I'm going to do it because I just, you know, it's where I feel called or where I feel drawn to. And, you know, one thing led to another, you know, getting involved with, you know, Mr. Greenberg, and then just going through the motion of building a school from scratch. I think that's something that's so important, and I want to just talk about is building something from scratch is obviously really difficult, right? When you don't have when you don't have the means, when you don't have the necessary resources at first or the support, it seems pretty daunting to want to start anything from scratch. And I think what I love about your story of how you were able to build this organization, LPS Hayward, into what it is today, right? Into the, you know, thinking about all the accolades and accomplishments that it's had. It really started with that vision. I loved how you said it all started with a vision. It all started with some idea of getting students an opportunity from this small town called Hayward, right? I know it didn't start in Hayward, but taking students that, you know, had no idea, parents who had no idea, they had no experience or attachment to this school, but, you know, trying to do the groundwork and recruit parents or recruit students to believe in your vision. And I think that's something that I really admire, is starting from scratch, finding people, basically any people, to just buy into what you believed in it or what you had envisioned for your students. And for it to, you know, it started off slow. I'm assuming, you know, started out, you know, with a few students, but then to just see what could happen in just a year span or even a 4-year span. You know, I was very fortunate to get some of the early taste of what LPS was back in the day, but then to see where it is now, and just to really think about all of the growth that the school has had, and for it to be one of the top in the state, and for it to, you know, push its boundaries on test scores and push its boundaries on what students can accomplish from such a small city in Hayward. I think that's such a inspiring means to what could be for, you know, anyone that has a vision, right? If we put in the work, if we find the right support and we have the right mindset behind it, I think that's really important to note that, you know, for something that's as big as a school, you can start that if you have a vision, if you have the right people supporting you. And, you know, the heart for it, I think, is also really important. Just because you have the vision, just because you have the mindset, right? If you don't have the heart to serve the population or the demographic or the community you have, it's going to be twice as hard. And so I think ever since I stepped onto campus, or ever since I stepped onto that first retreat, I could feel the heart of the school. And I think that's something that's really important. Is, do you feel the heart of the person that you're connected with? Do you feel the heart behind whoever's bringing you into this job? And, you know, do you resonate with that? And I think I really appreciate how, as soon as I walked in, I felt like I was part of a community. And so I'm sure that took a lot. It wasn't easy at first, I'm sure, but, you know, you going into that head on first of wanting to serve students was obviously getting through the first step. So I really like that story.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's I've always believed that high school students have very high emotional intelligence. They may be lacking in other places, but emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, so one, you know, I think that if you show yourself and who you are, they'll believe you. Right.
I like that.
Which is why sometimes when I'd have students in my office, talk about like some of their experience with some of their folks.
Right.
Like, I don't think this person cares about me, right? And that was more important to them than like anything else, right?
Yeah.
So I think kids have very high emotional intelligence. And two, coming out of the middle school, right? Like,
yeah,
middle school is this weird place anyway. And it's not just like in Hayward; it's like national.
Yeah, everywhere.
Right?
Yeah.
You go and spend kindergarten through like 5th or 6th grade somewhere where you're slowly starting to build up your identity and
right.
You know who you are, and you know how to move around, you know your teachers, and you have a connection or what have you. And then it's like, all right, I'm gonna drop over here for a minute for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
It's a completely different place at a time when your body is completely changing.
That's true.
Your voice is changing.
Yep.
Like you're changing. You're like this is like the most transition you'll ever have in your life.
That's true.
And we're going to put you in this foreign place with new rules, new regulations, new ideas, new students. And then you're like, what just happened? Now you go into high school with a choice of what identity you want to have. Right. You either have the identity that you were kind of growing in middle school, but a lot of times that middle school identity is based on other people's identities.
That's good. That's good.
It's not even really based on your own.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, I think the part about our school is that folks quickly started to realize that they could be themselves, whatever that meant. Right. And they didn't have to be somebody else. Right. And they didn't have to play around because they thought that was the cool thing to do. And they realized, like, I can actually just be a student.
Yeah.
And actually just learn. And it'll be okay. And everybody else will be okay with that, too. And I think one of the things that was always interesting about LPS is, like, students who weren't traditionally considered as, like, cool kids, right, were the cool kids at our school, right? People who weren't necessarily, like, the kids that people would want to hang out with in middle school became the kids that everybody wanted to be in our high school, right? And so that's what's one of the kind of interesting and fun things about our school is like it just allowed for people to be whoever they were.
Yeah.
And then whoever you were you got a chance to shine as a student and not a stereotype.
So many good things about that when you mentioned that high schoolers have this high emotional intelligence, and being a middle school teacher now, I definitely understand that transition, right? Just leading kids that are in a lost place, emotionally, physically, they're just transitioning, and that's a huge part of why that middle school area is so tough. And then you come into this high school mold of where there's already a lot of expectations for you. There's already this vision of whatever the next step is, whether that's college or something else greater. And you're really forced in a situation where you have to think about yourself and not so much worry about other people. And I think that's really important, is that in the middle school year, or even before pre-high school, you're really caught up in this idea of my identity is based off other people, how they view me, how they see me, and also feeding into your parents or whoever's raising you. And you get into this high school level, and it's not so much of maybe what other people think, but it's also how is my environment complementing who I want to be. It gets a little bit more deeper. How do I want to contribute to my environment? And there's this duality of it, of figuring out where you lie in this new culture, but also how is this culture going to benefit you? And you sort of get this idea of how to navigate that. And I feel that's a very important message to come across, especially as a leader of a school or as a dean or as a teacher, is the importance of how to navigate students' lives during high school. And I think you did it wonderfully. You did it to the degree that I can never imagine of otherwise. And I just really appreciate how, going through my high school days and going through the years, I really felt that, where I could be myself, where I could find someone and find teachers and find a peer group or just any staff member that believed in me to the point where I could be myself. And you saw what skills I had, or what strengths, or even what weaknesses I had, and how are we going to play into that, of how this student goes through the 4 years at our school. And I really appreciate just the belief you had in all your students. Like you said, maybe traditionally in a traditional school, you have your certain stereotypical groups of, you know, these are the smart kids, or these are the popular kids or whatever, and you come into school like Leadership Public Schools Hayward, and those norms or those ideas or those expectations they're just not there. And I think that anyone could have been anyone, and that's the beauty of not just the school, but the foundation of that school, and the foundation and the mentality that you brought into the schools nearby and just across the state is that, you know, you can take any of these different type of students from different backgrounds and just really give them the resources or give them the tools, but most importantly, give them the belief that they can accomplish what they want to accomplish. You know, we're still a new school, we're still figuring things out, and we're still trying to challenge students, but we have a staff that cares. We have an awesome dean in yourself at the time, and we have a wonderful principal and, you know, office support that just really is driven on bringing out the best in their students, right? The test scores will come later, or the opportunities for APs will come later. But right now, what is really important is that our students believe and, you know, they feel it for themselves, that they're cared for, that they're believed in, and it's not sugar-coated, but it's in a way that's really realistic, saying that you can accomplish this if you put in the work, if you ask the right questions and find the right people. And you really surrounded Leadership Public Schools with all those different things. And so it's wonderful just to hear how you built that school and how it really played out over the years. When I think of the school over the past 15 years too, I get really excited, Mr. Wandera. So talk a little bit about how did the development of the school over the past 15 years really attested to the kind of person that you were, and the value of you as a person, and also kind of how that feeds into who you are today. So it's kind of a double part question.
So I mean, I really thought about when I thought about how I wanted the school culture to look like. I really wanted to have a school culture that found a way to implement positive peer pressure. Right. So when you think about family meeting, you know, that we had every Friday,
yeah,
it was really an opportunity to promote positive peer pressure, right? Like, what are shout outs and call outs at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
And if we're doing shout outs for other people, we are publicly acknowledging what we see as a good thing at the school.
Yeah.
When we're doing call outs, we are publicly acknowledging what we don't agree with. And so because of that, it then starts to shape people, right? It starts to shape like how they view themselves within the LPS society, if you will.
Yeah.
To say like, all right, these things are being called out. So if I'm doing those things, then technically I'm being called out.
That's true.
I want to be shouted out, then I need to make some alterations.
Wow.
Right? And so people can come to their own conclusions on those things without being the direct, you know, recipient of a call out.
That's true.
Right? They can hear that through some of the conversations and start to make some adjustments, right? And that happens over time too, right? Because if I'm hearing that in 9th grade, and then again in 10th grade, and then again in 11th grade, it might not be until 12th grade until I'm like, oh, I got it, right? But the point is to get it before you leave, right? And so, so I really wanted to have a place that was built on positive peer pressure, and ultimately build a place that was built on very high expectations. Because despite what some people may think, people actually want folks to have high expectations of them.
Yeah.
They may not be used to it, right? But they want people to have high. Nobody wants to say like, you know what? I want you to think really low of me, right? I want you to believe that I can't do anything. Right? Like nobody wants that. Right? People want to be pushed, and they want to feel like, you know, they're doing better, right? And to be acknowledged for their strengths, right? So it was important to me to have like a school or have a place that really kind of acknowledged folks' growth and determination and getting better, which is why, you know, the Rural of the Week thing existed, because then it gave somebody things to aspire towards. Right?
I remember.
This is the top of the food chain right here. and I'm literally getting the game plan every single Friday how to get there,
That's
right?
true.
Like everybody in the entire room is saying how I got there,
Yeah.
right? So now everybody can hear it, right? And then I can use it to my advantage for me to be better, right? And so really kind of developing positive peer pressure, having high expectations, because folks also knew if they didn't do the things that they were supposed to do, somebody was going to call them out on it.
It's true.
I knew I would, right? And so I had very high expectations for everybody, including students that did very well, right? And so some of the hardest conversations that I had were in a student government room full of the best and the brightest, right? To say, you're not carrying your weight. What are you doing? Right?
I remember those.
And that's important because, sometimes in school, what happens is like the kid that, gets all the accolade and gets all the praise never gets any of the feedback, right?
True.
Sometimes those kids just grow up to be jerks, right? Like, I'm the smart kid. Nobody's ever told me I couldn't do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Now, I'm the best and you can't tell me anything, right? Versus like, nah, you still have work to do. You still have ways to grow, right? And so that was the kind of the other part of it is like, how do you push leaders to be better leaders, right? While at the same time pushing those people who aren't quite leaders yet to become leaders. Right? So it's like this full kind of like cyclical thing. I just believe that in the long run, it always plays out. And that students are better people for it or better parents for it, right? You got a lot of kids who have graduated are now like full-fledged adults, almost 30 years old for some of them. They have kids and families and stuff like that. And like some of those messages that they got when they were in high school still live with them.
Definitely. And that's the important part of how, when I think back to the school and, things like family meeting that, you forget after the years, you don't necessarily remember the physical space, but you remember the feeling. You remember what did you get out of those family meetings. And, obviously, just speaking from personal experience, I always got a lot out of family meetings, hearing the different testimonies or the different stories. And like you said, the shout outs and call outs. But what I'm starting to realize now is the meaning behind the family meetings, right? It's on service level, you can see how it's a space for students to shout each other out, a space for students to call other students out, a space for you to send out announcements, to create events. And on the service level, it's that. But then I loved how you talked about, well, this is a big moment of feedback for me, right? When I go through family meeting and I hear all these different students talking about the things that they love about each other, the things that they don't love about each other, and just to see the interactions that students were having during family meeting, that was a way for you that clicked in your head. How am I going to make the school better? How can I take the feedback from the students and turn this place into a better school? And that's the underlying message behind family meeting. Sometimes we didn't want to go, right? It was another Friday routine, but then for you, it was that moment where you could figure out the culture of your school. You could figure out the temperature and see how students are doing throughout the day and throughout the week, and find a way to take what they're feeling and hopefully project a better week or a better month looking forward. And it's just a huge growing place that a lot of high schoolers, or at least students from LPS, maybe didn't realize at the time. It was doing wonders behind the background, just having a space like family meeting. I think of, traditional high schools that, maybe don't have the capacity to do family meeting, or I think of the capacity of a middle school that maybe doesn't have the right environment to host. But, all these different initiatives that LPS had so uniquely to that school definitely played a part in how a lot of us interact today. And I think when you mentioned it with, maybe your first graduating class that are having families now, and how a lot of those themes or a lot of those ideas are feeding into how they are as adults now, I can definitely attest how the mindset and the mantra or the idea, like you said, leaders, how can I grow leaders that are already leaders, and how can I grow people that may not see themselves as leaders into students that want to take the next step or take a leadership role. I definitely feel that, not just as a teacher, but when I interact in these different spaces with other people, right? How am I being a role model for someone else? If I see myself as a role model, how am I becoming a better role model? And this really progressive intuitive, reflective mindset of we're all part of the same community in some degree, right? How am I contributing to my community, and what do I want to contribute to my community? And just all these different questions, whether you work in a school, whether you work in an office space, whether you work in a business, right? All these different entities, how are you contributing to that culture of reflection? How are you normalizing reflection is a good phrase that I heard recently. And so when I think back to just all the behind the scenes of these spaces that I was a part of in high school, it's crazy to think of how much of an impact those spaces still feed into how I am today. And I'm really, really humbled by the fact that I've got to experience a lot of those spaces, because like I said earlier, not a lot of traditional schools have a place where 500 students, basically the whole school, can come together, talk about their feelings, talk it out openly with each other, but also find a way to make it more positive with the different events and activities that we also did. So I think that's one of the things I appreciate about just a charter school in general, is you have the opportunity, you have the autonomy to make those happen. And so I just see that in yourself too, Mr. Wandera. When I think of your name, or when your name pops up in conversation, I think of those things, not just the way that you did it, but how it was really genuine to who you are. And that's one thing I really appreciate. Like you said, when you do something out of intention with the genuine compliment of who you are, it'll shine in the ways that it's supposed to manifest. And I think that's something that I always appreciated, was that you called us out when you wanted to call us out. You shouted us out when we needed it, and you were just that person that was real from the start. And I think that's something that we all need to do. And no matter if we're in education or not, we just have to be real with one another, but coming from a very humble humility standpoint, saying, I want you to get better, I want to get better, how can we get better, and complimenting them through that. So it's definitely, when I think of LPS, it's an extension of who you are, and it'll always be an extension of who you are. So it's dope. It's cool. When I see also where we're going to shift gears a little bit, because I'm really interested to see how this has played out over the years. You know, we talked a lot about education and we talked a lot about leadership public schools, but one thing that I also think about you when you come to mind is your brand, and you have it right on the screen right here, Hello Original. So Hello Original, your clothing brand, I was fortunate enough to get the taste of it when you were first starting out when I was in high school, but speak about the mindset behind the clothes, the sacrifices you made to get there, and just what are your hopes for the future?
Well, Hello Original was built out of a basketball game, ultimately. Playing basketball at LPS, and I ended up rupturing my Achilles.
I remember that.
Yeah, which was all bad, and left me in my bed for several months at a time. But in some ways, it's similar to where we're at right now in terms of like coronavirus, right? I was in a situation where I was sheltered in place. I couldn't even leave my bed. And so I was figuring out, like, how do I turn this negative into a positive? Good. And so after I watched a bunch of television shows, I eventually got to a point where I was just bored, and like TV wasn't exciting anymore. Yeah. And so it was like, I need to learn how to do something. And so when I was talking to a friend of mine, I was asking for a television show recommendation. I was like, you got something else to watch? Like, why don't you do something else? Like, learn something. I was like, learn something like what? Right? He said, well, you always said you wanted to make T-shirts. And I was like, yeah, that's true. You know, so let me think about that. So I always say that we live in this Jeopardy world right now. If you ever watch the show Jeopardy, they'll give you the answers, but you got to figure out the questions. Right? And so the world that we live in right now is like all the answers are in our pocket, like literally. Every answer to the entire world is in the pocket or on the computer, right? Yeah. The problem is you might not know the questions to ask to get the answer, right? So if you don't know what questions to ask, then you can't get there, right? And so for me, it was like, all right, I know that I want to make T-shirts, but what does that mean? Like, so then it became like, you know, print thingy on the thingy, like what's the thing? Eventually you find the word, right? You're like, oh, screen printing, that's what that's called, right? And so then you're like, okay, now that I know what screen printing is, what is screen printing? Right. How does it work? right? And so then once you learn how it works, then you're like, oh, what's a squeegee, right? And you start like, learning all these different things along the way. And it's like, all right, so now that I can screen print, well, where does that image come from, right? And then, so then it was like, okay, so is it just pictures or is it text or what is it, right? And so then once you figure out, oh, I could do this on Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop.
Yeah.
All right, so now that I know what I can do to create it, what am I creating, right? And so then it becomes like, all right, well, how do clothing brands like advertise themselves, right?
Right.
And when you start to really think of it on a very like macro level, you start to think about like, certain brands represent a certain lifestyle.
There
right?
you go. Yeah.
So if you were to think about polo, for example, right?
Yeah.
When you think of polo, like first of all, I've never seen anybody play polo, right? It's a very elite, right? Like sport.
Yeah.
So when you think of the clothing, you think of elite clothing, right? Because it's an elite sport, it's elite clothing, right? Conversely, you think about like Echo, right?
Yeah.
When Echo was a thing, right? So Echo's kind of mascot, if you will, was this rhino, right? And so then it becomes, well, what does the rhino represent? It's really kind of like this tough street interior, right? And this was streetwear.
Yeah.
Right. So then as you start to do that with all your different clothing brands and stuff like that, you start to understand that what you're creating has to represent something.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so I went through kind of all those iterations. Then it was like, all right, now you got to have an understanding of business, right? And having an understanding of business means you have to be able to provide something that's a hole in the marketplace.
Right.
What's missing? Right?
Yeah.
So anybody that's successful is always answering that question of what's missing and then filling in that hole.
Yeah.
Right? So us having this Zoom conversation right now, like Zoom wasn't even a thing for most people.
Very true.
6 months ago. But because of a necessity and a need, it stepped right in, and now they're making tons of money because of it, right?
Yep.
So, but it took them to think about like this need way in advance before we need it or use it, right? And so it's just like all those kind of thought processes. So I had to think about like what I wanted to create, what I had to do in order to create it, and then what was going to be the representation, right?
Yeah.
And so the first initial thought process was like, all right, where's the hole in the market? I said, I think the hole in the market is in child's clothing, and kids' clothes.
Yeah.
Young kids' clothes.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about my son, and I was like, if I look at his closet, all his T-shirts have like baseball or dinosaurs or basketball. It's like some cute little thing. I said, well, there's nothing in his closet that I would wear as an adult.
Wow.
Like, there's nothing in the closet that I would wear as an adult. And I said, so I said, I think the hole in the market is coming up with cool clothes for kids.
Yeah.
Like miniature size things that I too would wear as an adult. Right?
Yeah.
Girls don't have that problem. A lot of the girl stuff, right? You can amp it up and it would still fit,
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Boys, it doesn't play out the same. Like I'm not wearing a fire truck T-shirt, right? So I was like, all right, so I want to make a cool shirt. And so the first thing was like, all right, I needed to have a logo, if you will.
Yeah.
The first logo that I could think of, I was like, all right, well, I want a kid inside of a stroller. Driving a stroller like he's driving a car, right? And kind of be in control of his own destiny or whatever, right? So I created what was then called Kid Snapback.
Yeah.
So I created Kid Snapback, and I love that logo that I made from scratch.
Yeah.
Right? Made me feel really good about that.
That's good.
It's like, all right, so I got one thing, but I need more than that, right? So then I made one other like logo thing or like one other T-shirt design. I didn't really like that one that much, but I needed 3, so I did that one. And then the third one, I was like, man, I'm running out of ideas. I need an original idea. I just can't think of an original idea, but it can't just be an original idea.
Yeah.
Gotta be like a hella original idea. That's pretty good. I think I'll use that. So I literally just put Helen Original on a kid's T-shirt. Right. So I went and did some shows out in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And I went to this one when they had Carnival out there. I set up a booth, and I was selling these kids T-shirts out of the booth, right? And people kept on coming to me, and they were like, "I like this Helen Original shirt. When are you going to make an adult version? Do you have an adult version?" And I was like, "No, it's a kid's shirt. That's why you like it, because you wear it. But it's for kids. That's the whole point, true. Right? Right. But the questions kept on coming, like, we want adult, we want adult. I'm like, no, these aren't for adults, right?
Yeah.
And so then the thing came where it was like, all right, how do I advertise this brand as a kid's brand? So you need child ambassadors, if you will, right?
Wow.
So then what you started to learn on Facebook and Instagram was that parents would be willing to buy the shirt for their kid.
Yeah.
They weren't always willing to put them on Instagram and have them advertise for you.
That's true.
Right? And so we're like, hey, man, post the shirt. And they're like, I don't really want my son on the, that kind of space like that. Yeah. And so then it became like, all right, so people have been asking for an adult shirt. And in terms of advertising, I kind of need the adult shirt.
Yeah.
And so then I said, you know what? Let me try the adult shirts. So I took some pre-orders. And I ordered 100 shirts on a Friday, and I was sold out. I was sold out on a Sunday.
Crazy.
Like, oh, we're not selling kids' clothes anymore. We have now crossed over. So I put a lot of work into it, and eventually got to some celebrities and stuff like that.
Yeah,
it was really cool. But the story behind that was that it landed in celebrities' hands. Because I worked really, really hard to make that happen. Right. Like, I was very intentional, and I was on it every single day. Yeah. And then as I started to get more busy and my life started to become more busy, I started to spend less time on it. I see. And when I spent less time on it, I started to get less returns on it. Right. So it's like you literally get what you put in. Right. And so that was kind of the birth of it, and also the learning from it. So, it's always there. I still sell online. I got two orders yesterday. So I got to send out, right? So it's still thriving and still alive and still well. Yes. And it's just a testament to what can happen when you make a decision and to not let lemons spoil it. I mean, I still walk with a limp, right?
Oh man,
because of those. That ruptured Achilles.
Yeah.
But it's turned out to be the greatest injury of all time because it's created a business that's still alive. Was it 7-8 years later?
Yeah, I think that's the wonderful part too. Just the idea of relating it back to the time that we're in, right? I loved how you said that during a pandemic like we're in right now, it's so easy to get caught up of not doing anything or using up our time to just rest. Or, I mean, a lot of us are in a position where we can't do much, right? I recognize that. And, a lot of us are thinking about other means. And so, but when you're in a space where you can think about other things and you choose to maybe, not do much with your time, not be as productive and just wind time and really just count the hours until the next day, it gets tough to really get yourself out of that over a time. And I think that's a lot of where I was too, in a space of, I have a pandemic. I have to stay at home. I'm in the space that I am right now, and how can I use the space for something better? So I think when we're thinking about your brand at the time where you were at home, you were injured, you physically cannot go anywhere, your mind is already glued on a TV. How else can I use my mind? And I think that's a huge part of going into the mentality of today, right? Where we have so much change and we're all, challenging ourselves with different things or preoccupied with different things at the moment. For those that are not as preoccupied with things, how are you using your time? And that's a very important question. And a lot of us are thinking about that question for the better, right? How can I use my time for something to start a business, to start a brand, to start a mini project, to start a new passion? A lot of us are doing that, but then at the same time, a lot of us are not, right? And, take your time, whoever is listening and they feel like they're on the couch watching TV right now, like you do you, there's nothing wrong with that. But you know, there's so much more that you could be tapping into your potential if you just have some idea, if you talk to the right person, if you have the right idea, roll with it. I mean, you're not doing much right now. I think it'd be good for all of us to start continuing something that we've always wanted to do. For me, that was talking and continuing conversations, even though I couldn't have physical conversations with people anymore, right? So I created this platform. You know, maybe it's you're injured from a basketball game and you're stuck at home and you've always wanted to make t-shirts. Why don't you start thinking about a brand, right? So whatever it is for you, go ahead and do that. And I just love how you really tied it back to the times we're in today, because it's a huge metaphor for a lot of us that are just trying to utilize our time. And you know, you don't want to utilize it just to utilize it. You want to utilize it so you have some product or some idea or some outcome that you can really grow and nurture over time. It's not just a one-time thing saying, I'm going to do laundry today, right? So I love that idea. I love that it's still going. I have that tank top. I still have it, you know, after eight years, I still have that and I'm still repping it where I go. But, you know, I think it's really nice that you've built something from scratch again, that you're able to really reflect on almost a year later saying, I'm proud of it. It's still living on, it's still alive, and it will continue to stay alive as long as I put in the time and the work for what it is, right? Because nothing's going to grow overnight just by you having this wonderful idea and then not watering that seed, right? You got to keep putting in the work and you have to keep watering it where you have the capacity to water it. And then over time, you'll get a tree, right? And I think that's the important thing to recognize is, you know, find that seed, continue to grow it, water it, but also, you know, take your time because you have to be patient with these kinds of things. So that's good.
Yep. Yep.
Mr. Wandera, to really wrap things up, I love, you know, reflecting back on our journey through LPS, but more importantly, your journey through LPS, and to see where you are now being executive director. I wouldn't expect anything less because of the type of person that you are and who you were for a lot of your students, a lot of who you were for your staff. And, you know, you're just this prominent figure in the community. And I think that's really important to recognize and appreciate is, you know, just giving honor to who you are as a person and what you've done for not just Hayward, and not just the Bay Area, but, you know, for your state and, you know, basically what you're doing for students that are all living in this country, right? Just wanting to reform education in a way you seem fit, but now moving on to into the next step of college readiness and being, you know, the next top dog. And I just love that for you. And, you know, talking through that and talking about, you know, your own passions and who you are, it's something that we can all really learn from. And I'm always been fortunate enough to learn from ever since I was in high school, and taking a lot of your, you know, your small nuances or your attributes as, you know, a dean, and, you know, serving that in a way that's myself for my students. You know, I'll definitely attribute that to you, of just who you are for me at the time is definitely how I want to be for my students moving forward. And so, you know, focusing on the positives of what we have in life. But, you know, to wrap things up, if you could dial it back again and recreate a very, very short graduation speech for another class one last time, what would you say and why?
Well, I would just, you know, I would really just pattern it around, you know, consistent growth and really trying to find a way to be better every single day. There's going to be setbacks, and there's going to be times where, you know, you're going to hit a downturn or what have you. But as long as you're always trending upward, you're heading in the right direction, right? And really what I said earlier, I think is really true in terms of like everything you've ever wanted to know, from like the stock market to changing your toilet.
That's true.
Is in your pocket.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's really about just remaining and staying curious, and getting and engaging in conversations, because there's somebody out there that's willing to, you know, write it down for you to read it somewhere on Google, or is there to perform it or say it on YouTube. And you can actually vet other people. You can watch this video and this video and this video and this video, and if all 5 of those videos are saying the exact same thing, then that might be what it is, right? So so there's really no excuse in the world that we live in now. If you've got a you got a tablet or a phone or a computer, like you can learn anything. You can push yourself to learn anything. And so I would just say, just like there's no limitations whatsoever. The ceiling is no longer what it once was.
Right.
So people really need to try to find ways to take advantage of it and grow and really think about, what is the next, the generation that we're going into, what does that look like now? How are you embracing technology to be on your side, right? And really just thinking about like, how am I constantly reinventing and strengthening myself to provide opportunities for not only my family, but for my family's families, right? For my kids and my future kids, and that I may never meet, you know what I mean? So, so it's really like we live in a very special time.
It's true.
Crazy time right now, but it's a very special time. There's no excuse and no reason why you can't learn a new hobby, learn a new, business model, or reinvent yourself and make pivots to improve yourself and your community around you.
That's huge, right? This idea of pivoting in a time where you really have to pivot, I think is a good thing to take away, not just from, what you said right now, but just your story in general. You've had so many pivot moments in your life, right? And a lot of us do or will experience in our lifetime is when something comes up or another opportunity presents, how are you going to pivot, right? It's not necessarily, what direction you're going to take in this moment, but how are you going to pivot so that you open more doors, more opportunities in the future? And I think that's something that's really important to note about your life and the way that you've created this school, this organization, but also how you've, like you said, you reinvented yourself by taking the next step of, how else can I take my skills? How else can I take my desire, my passions, and take that to the next level or a different level for that matter? And, like I said, and I'll always say again is, appreciate you, Mr. Wandera. Keep doing what you're doing. Like I said, I look up to you and I will always look up to you, whether, you're my teacher or you're not my teacher. Now we're moving to life in different directions. I'll always be supporting you on this side. It's weird to say that I'm supporting, my former teacher. It was a lot of, I'm supporting you to your students, but now I'm always rooting for you, and I really appreciate just all that you will continue to do.
Thank you. It was great. It was great to catch up with Kessler.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone that tuned in for today. Continue to keep up with this teacher series. There's a lot of good knowledge, a lot of good wisdom coming this way, not just out of education, but a lot that we can apply to our lives. So stay tuned for future episodes. Mr. Wandera, thank you so much for your time. Until the next time, I'll see you later.
All right.